Hello everybody, and in today's video we are going to take a look at the upcoming weather pattern we have coming on the way from late November into early December. But first I want to take a moment to kind of address something that's really been going on here on YouTube, and it's pretty unfortunate, I have to say, and that's the overuse of these terms you see on the screen. The overuse of historic or major, this is a big polar vortex attack, or this is a big storm, on storms that maybe are relatively minor, relatively, light, impacting a small part of the US that may be used to these type of events. But, this is a major, major storm, or something that might break a few records here and there. This is historic, or, polar vortex attack every single time we have a somewhat deep trough going into part of the US. So this is a big storm. Unfortunately, if you're pretty much getting taken advantage of as the viewer, by these titles, by these people who are putting out these, words in their title for so many events that aren't worthy of these descriptions. I can see if there's a big storm impacting a lot of the United States with pretty significant impacts, then sure, go ahead. It's a major storm, major impacts will be felt across much of the country. It's a major storm, go ahead, major. But, if we're seeing maybe 1/200th of the population of the US, maybe being impacted moderately by a storm, there is no reason to call it a major storm or a historic storm. I want to get all these views and all this AdSense revenue and, just bring all these viewers in, even though it's not historic, it's not major. I just want you to click on the video and subscribe to the channel. But this is what's been going on YouTube, and hopefully this video is viewed by those who are doing it and those who are perhaps clicking on these videos because of these titles and would probably, realize that, I'm probably getting clickbaited. But anyways, now let's get into what we have going on for the pattern into late November. So we have some pretty exciting times coming up, in my opinion. So where we have been at recently is that we had, a pretty deep trough come in for about a week into the central and eastern parts of the US. There were a good amount of records broken across these areas, obviously as far as, cold. But now we head into late November, and this was the time period back in the monthly forecast where we had a little bit less certainty, a little bit less, just because it's a little bit further out. But now here we are. We're starting to, kind of get out of the grip of this pretty intense cold, and now here we are moving into perhaps this beginning of winter. So taking a look at the Euro ensemble, ensembles are pretty reliable. It's pretty it's pretty accurate most of the time. So here we are, here's now. We have the cold really exiting, but we will have another quick shot come in this weekend, provide some below average temperatures for the Northeast specifically. But by the time next week, you can see this ridge kind of builds into the eastern US. And then we do have a trough down in the southwestern US. But overall, much of the US should be seeing about average to maybe slightly above average temperatures by the time late next week rolls around. Now, that will be pretty much the only time that much of the US is seeing those temperatures, because by the time we get into late next week, maybe the first, the week of Thanksgiving, that is when we will have this pattern that we have been seeing already kind of emerge back into reality. Because as we head into the week of Thanksgiving, as you can see, another trough moves through the Northeast, and then we have these blues building in the east. This is a signal for troughing on the East Coast, ridging on the West Coast, even some ridging and perhaps blocking up towards Greenland. It's always what you want to see if you are looking for some decent storms on the East Coast, or at least some decent cold. Obviously, it's not always a guarantee, at least this early in the year. Now, moving into 300 hours out, this is pretty far out, but the pattern really stays, true to even what it was before. Now, we do have maybe a signal of a little bit of troughing out in the west, which kind of would degrade the ridging in the east, or the troughing in the east. But then as we move out into this is pretty long range. You can see it's still, it's still relatively cold into late parts of November. Now, for the GFS, it's a pretty similar story in that we have a quick period of maybe a little bit of above average temperatures late next week, but then we have some troughing building into the central and eastern U.S. By the time we get into Thanksgiving, this is really the time period that we have, probably our best shot for a storm somewhere, maybe in the Midwest, maybe it's the Northeast, maybe it's the Mid-Atlantic. But this time period is looking rather promising for a storm, maybe, especially with how active the both streams really have been lately. And then that continues just like the Euro had it into late November, and even in the early December. It just continues. And let's look at how this translates into temperatures on the ground. As far as anomalies, this is all the way out into early December, really, but you can see for much of this run, below average temperatures in the east and central portions of the U.S. with above average temperatures on the west coast. And then we saw that banana high really from the western parts of the U.S. into central Canada and then over Greenland. So these are all pretty good signs if you're a snow lover in the eastern U.S. I'm not going to guarantee there's going to be a storm. It might even be a rainstorm. You could get really bad timing where troughs exiting the region and then a storm decides to cut right up. Most of us get rain and then it follows, it's followed by a pretty deep trough. But, regardless of us freezing for 9 days out of 10, the one day that we weren't, a storm decided to cut through the Midwest and we rain. So there's always a possibility that can happen. Now let's look at why this is going on and what really backs up the ensemble. So looking at the AO, all the way through late November, you can see that it's really expected to stay a little bit negative. We don't want it to go too far negative because that can really, it really depends where you are, I guess. But when the AO goes a little bit too far negative, it can suppress storms to the south down into, and also make them weaker down into maybe North Carolina, Virginia. But it all depends on where you are, I guess. So looking at other teleconnections, we have the EPO. We want to see this negative on the East Coast and in the Central Plains. Right now, it's about neutral, maybe a little bit positive, but it is moving back negative, where we've seen it for the past few weeks. And that's why we've had this pretty amplified jet stream over the past few weeks. But just due to the NAO being really neutral, we haven't been able to take advantage of this on the East Coast as far as many snow events. So NAO, it's really looking like it's going to be negative once again. So, if you're wondering why the heck were all those below average temperatures on the East, is this just a classic, we're going to have below average temperatures in the East 2 weeks out and it doesn't happen? Well, when all these teleconnections look pretty good, there's a good chance that it's going to happen. So then the PNA is the only thing of concern because right now it's a little bit positive, but it could be heading towards neutral or even negative. So that's a little bit of concern on the East Coast and in the Central Plains, just because obviously you want a positive PNA for the troughing in the East and ridging in the West. But, one teleconnection doesn't control it all. But as I like to say, it only takes one teleconnection to really ruin a pattern. You could have everything favorable, but if it's, say, the EPO or the PNA is in an unfavorable phase, then the entire pattern can be thrown off, regardless of the NAO and the AO being negative. So next, let's look at the MJO. The MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. This is, obviously we want it to be in phase 8, phase 1. This really has to do with activity out towards the, really the eastern hemisphere and also at the equator, just to make it really, really simple. But anyways, we want this to be in phase 8, phase 1. As you can see, this is for November, December, and January, because that's the months we're moving into. So phase 1, below average temperatures across much of the U.S. Phase 8, it's even colder. Phase 7 is pretty cold, and then all the other phases are relatively warm typically. Now, like I said, one teleconnection doesn't dominate. Sometimes the MJO has a little bit of lag time where the pattern takes a few weeks to respond to it, but other times not. So going back to the MJO, you can see that for the most part, we are in phase 8 right now. So this is what has been contributing to these below average temperatures and this troughing here on the east coast. So it's moving into phase 1 a few days ago, or I think the Euro has it moving into the circle of death. Some call it's really nothing, has no impact, but then maybe moving back into phase 1. And the Euro and the GFS pretty much have the same verification scores on this, so it looks like it's going to be moving back into phase 1 for early December. So that's definitely a good sign. For many on the East Coast, I'd imagine most of you watching this probably are in favor of some snow and in favor of, Christmas actually feeling like Christmas, unlike what we've had for the past few years. But, things are looking pretty good, I have to say, for the late November, early December, maybe even continuing after that, even from the central and eastern U.S. It looks like it's going to be pretty cold. And, I'd say below average temperatures will be pretty common for the remainder of the month and into early December. And that is obviously going to open the door for these storms, or at least the potential for these storms. Now, sometimes timing isn't always on your side. And, regardless of having a great pattern, you just get kind of, unfortunate, depending on what aspect you're looking at it from. But, we'll have to see. Really depends on the NAO, and with the NAO going negative, once again, that could be what's been missing and what will bring these storms up the coast, and especially if the cold's locked in the Central Plains and the Midwest, it doesn't really have an opportunity to cut. Could be an exciting next month, really. So we'll have to see how it turns out. Anyways, thanks for watching, everybody. And like I talked about earlier, kind of shy away from clicking or maybe even watching channels who like to, use these historic or major titles, literally every single week or twice, 3 times a week, every third video. It's not professional. They would never get away with that on any other platform, really. They would probably be bashed by many professionals, and it's just not something that you do, and it's really unfortunate that the YouTube community, as far as weather, now I know this is really brand new for YouTube, but hopefully we'll move on from this and maybe get a little bit more professional, but for now, this is what we have to deal with. And anyways, thanks for watching, everybody, and stay tuned for more updates in the future.